Hi, Andy. How are you doing today?
I've been better, but okay. Living.
Living.
Yeah.
hmm Living.
Well, I made the appointment because I've recently I've been kind of going through a breakup. Somebody I've been in a relationship with on and off for a few years.
hmm
Um, Alice Spencer, and we had some struggles and whatnot, and I think a lot of it had to do with the distance. And I think for me, I feel like I've been struggling with distance in relationships since the breakup that I had a few years ago, which I was in like a long term relationship, and I kind of wonder if I may be avoiding something by being in these relationships that are like distance based.
When you say distance, you're talking about physical distance, emotional distance.
I wonder if they're one and the same,
Oh.
kind of. Although I'll say like when I'm together, when we were together,
hmm
I felt very connected and what have you. Um, but it's weird because I feel as though most of the relationships that I've been in, it seems like as of late, have been like more distance based. You know.
Distance based. Tell me a little bit more about that.
So it's I work in an environment where a lot of my coworkers are spread out,
Mm-hmm.
and so it's most of the people I interact with live in other places, and so it's really easy to kind of get involved in a situation with someone from afar.
Right.
You know.
And if I remember your work situation correctly, you're working remotely, but you also have these opportunities where you meet with your colleagues and they're pretty intensive
Yeah,
situations too.
yeah, absolutely. So, it's like it's kind of funny because you're together just long enough to enjoy one another's company.
Mm-hmm.
Then you go back to your state, your home, or whatever. And so I wonder, how different it would be if we were all under one roof, 5 days a week, 40 hours a week, or whatnot. I'm sure that would, change the dynamics. I just don't know how.
Right. So it's almost like you have this honeymoon period just
Hmm.
repeating over and over and over, and you get
Hmm.
the best of people
Hmm.
in those few minutes. But then you try to maintain these relationships that start out of those situations across time and distance.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, I feel like this is kind of a pattern,
Mm-hmm.
and I so want to kind of get out of this pattern, but it's been really trying. So, and I feel like I've got blinders on. I'm too close to it. So I feel like there's things I'm not seeing, and which is why I felt like I needed to come in for get maybe some expert insights or whatnot.
At least an objective perspective,
Yeah.
somebody can see. As you were talking, one of the things that I noticed is whenever you talked about the pattern, you would say kinda,
Hmm.
kinda,
Hmm.
sort of.
Hmm.
And I'm wondering about that minimizing.
Hmm. Well, something I haven't really kind of noticed, but obviously, it's something I guess since this is like a pattern. Obviously, it's something I've kind of picked up on and whatnot. I feel like it is a pattern, not sort of. It is a
Mm-hmm.
pattern, but it's not really impacted me up until this last relationship. This last relationship was, it felt very meaningful, and it's been a very kind of painful, prickly breakup. You know.
You mentioned it.
Hmm.
It's been painful. It's caused this. It's a pattern.
Hmm.
What exactly is the it?
The breakup. I think the coming apart.
Mm-hmm.
I think I've always struggled with coming apart from people. I feel I connect. I feel like at a pretty deep level, and so it's challenging for me to come apart. Um, eh, you know, but what I'll say is, I think since had a long-term relationship that was like, 5 or 6 years. That, kind of imploded. And since then, I felt like there's been like a lot of barriers up. And sometimes I let people in, but I tend to kind of, keep people at arm's length. I feel more isolated than I have in the past in my life.
So you're choosing to be isolated.
I think so.
Hmm. How does that impact you on a day-to-day basis?
Well, I've gotten used to it. I've used the analogy of being like a desert dweller, and so I'll get into the, involved, like I was involved with this relationship, a
Hmm.
distance relationship, and so it was like an oasis, and it was, a wonderful experience. And when you find this oasis, much like if you were really traveling in the desert, it's hard to kind of leave that because you don't know when, where, if you're going to find, water again, or
Hmm.
shade or what have you. And so it's been um, a welcome thing. But on the flip side, it's like I think I intuitively understand that there's something that's um, problematic about the relationships because it is in a desert. And, I think ultimately I'd like to be out of the desert.
And so, in this most recent relationship, you chose to leave the oasis.
Yes. Or the oasis chose to leave me.
Oh.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So, and I think, I don't know, maybe there was some self sabotaging on my end.
Maybe.
I'm not sure.
Hmm.
I wouldn't say yes or no to that. I was in agreement with her when we got to that point, and it felt as though I'd already done some coming apart from the situation because I've been struggling with it for a while.
Hmm. Let's talk a little bit more about that struggle.
Hmm. Um, it's I think it's the come closer, come apart, come closer, come apart, kind of scenario where it felt so right to be together, and that was like a really powerful thing.
Hmm.
And but then it was when we came apart, like when I would leave to go home, that felt right too. And when I would come home, it was almost like I'd go through this recovery where I would like pull apart, from her, and kind of, you know, go back out into the desert, isolate myself and whatnot. And I think part of that is isolating myself from, maybe from the, the feelings attached there, you know.
Kind of building this protectiveness around yourself to protect you from the hurt, the
Hmm.
missing.
Yeah, I think probably. I think, again, like coming apart from me is a hard thing. Losing people, not easy. And so I feel as though there's somewhat of a protective coating around my heart.
Hmm.
I won't go as far as to say a wall. But I'll also say that, this person also had like a wall as well. And so we joked about that, being
Hmm.
on the other side of each other's walls and getting peeks on the other side of the walls and those kinds of things. So that's definitely come up.
So you use this as a protective strategy to
Hmm.
keep yourself from feeling
Hmm.
the grief of the comings and goings.
I think so.
Hmm.
I think that's definitely part of it. When you come apart, from someone, and that you have like this, as you were saying, they're like these experiences and intensives. You come together, and it's so powerful and whatnot, and then you kind of come apart from that, and it's very much a struggle.
Hmm.
You
Yeah,
know,
there's grief in that.
yeah.
Even in the smaller,
Hmm.
you know, moments that you're together, it's so wonderful. It feels so good. It's that
Hmm.
oasis.
Hmm.
You have to leave it, and that doesn't feel good.
Absolutely. And I think the feeling that I feel when I leave the oasis is a numbness.
Mm.
So I feel like I go numb. I bury myself in work, which is easy to do because there's always work to do when I get back,
Right.
ironically from work.
Hmm.
And so it's just like this ongoing kind of thing.
And Now you've had this recent breakup.
Mhm.
How are you feeling now?
I've tried not to numb myself,
Mm.
and it's been different because I want to get better. I recognize there's an issue, and I want to try to kind of connect with that and get through it and get on the other side. I want to be in a relationship that I don't have to leave. That's not built to implode at some point. It's a struggle, you know, because there's something that feels very foreign and off about that as well.
That.
Being in a, a committed relationship that's very accessible,
Accessible distance.
physically, emotionally, what have you.
So without the walls
Hmm.
and without the distance of space.
Yeah. Even when you say that, that kind of turns like that, like knots. Yeah. What do you do? What do you do when you can't? When you there's no intensive to leave. If you're out of the desert, there's nowhere to go. You're just there,
Mm-hmm.
day in and day out.
And the last relationship that you that had that closeness, that
Hmm.
proximity, was the one 6 years ago.
Yes.
Okay, so that was your last local serious relationship.
Yes.
Where do you experience that relationship in your body now?
Chest and shoulders. Chest and shoulders. Yeah. It
Mm-hmm.
kind of like it goes from the middle outward, and there's like a heaviness, tingling, that kind of thing. Kind of a residue, an emotional residue of sorts.
Mm-hmm. And when you breathe into that residue,
Hmm.
what is that like?
I want to. I want to be away from it. I want to move away from that
Mm-hmm.
sensation or that feeling.
Would you be willing to do some breathing with me in and around that space?
Sure,
Okay.
absolutely.
All right. So if you're comfortable, you can close your eyes. If not,
Hmm.
stay open. That's fine.
Hmm.
But let's just imagine that residue in your chest and in your shoulders, and imagine just breathing this white light into that residue and around that residue. Just breathing in slowly and deeply, and imagining that breath circling, encompassing that residue, maybe even collecting all of it into one spot. Taking another deep breath, breathing slowly and steadily in and around it. How does that feel?
Feels like it moves.
Also,
It moves downward. It feels more solid,
mm-hmm.
and it feels like it moves. It's still intact, but it moves downward.
Moves downward.
Uh huh. Hmm.
Mm-hmm. And how does it feel to you to have it move downward?
Hmm. Strange. Strange. It's a strange internal sensation.
Mm-hmm.
And I and my initial thought was I would like for it to move out.
Out.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
out would be good.
Okay. And that may be something we can work
Mm-hmm.
towards.
Mm-hmm.
I think this first part of it is really just acknowledging that you've been holding on to that residue for
Mm-hmm.
almost 6 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that may be that protective coating that
Mm-hmm.
you described earlier in the session about feeling that there's this protective coating between you and the other relationships that you've tried to have since then.
It's funny to think of holding on to anything that's painful. It's like holding on to like a hot plate or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
When your initial reaction is, I just like to kind of let that go.
Mm-hmm. But you haven't.
Mm-mm. Yeah, and I honestly, cognitively, I can say that I'm not trying to hold on to. I don't wish to hold on to it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yet you are holding on to it in a way that's, you know, So you're holding on to this protective coating,
Mhm.
yet you're not intentionally holding on to this protective
Mhm.
coating.
Mhm. No, it feels heavy and cumbersome and prickly and whatnot, and nothing that you really kind of want to experience. And
Mm-hmm.
so, you know, there's not a part of me that wishes to hold on to it. And I wonder as we're exploring that, you know, what is it that it doesn't allow me to kind of let it go, or what will it take to let it go? Is
Mm-hmm.
maybe a better question.
Right. And how does it impact what you're
Hmm.
trying to do in your life today?
Hmm.
So because this is a past that you're holding on to for
Hmm.
whatever reason, and how does that impede you in your goals now?
Hmm. Well, you know, there's part of me that feels as though, um, you know, when I'm thinking what I imagine to be a healthy relationship is one that's more local, accessible, consistent, where the person's available and I'm available to them, what have you. Um, that's just not been my reality over the last
Mm-hmm.
5 or 6 years.
Right. Going back to that feeling, that residue that you're holding, I'm wondering how that has helped you up to this point. Because we usually hold on to things that help us, even if
Hmm.
we at first think it's prickly and, but how has it helped you?
Hmm. I think at the very least I can say it's ironically, initially, I would say it kept me from further pain.
Mm-hmm.
It would keep me from relationships that would cause more pain. You know, now it feels as though it's sustaining, you know, the issues that are causing the pain. But you know, when I initially got out of the relationship, it had to kind of feel, you know, when you leave an all you can eat restaurant and you feel really full, and somebody mentions food, and you're like, no, I don't want to
Mm-hmm.
ever eat again. You know,
Right.
and eventually, of course, you get hungry again,
Mm-hmm.
you know. But I think there's part of my body that really kind of, you know, it was like, hey, remember how sick you got with the last meal, you know? And
Mm-hmm.
that's where I feel like I am.
Okay. And so you kind of hinted at that it has begun to hinder you now, though.
Mhm. Yeah, because you know, at this point, it just seems to be sustaining this pattern of pain, you know, to some degree. And so, whereas initially I feel like maybe it was there to keep me from pain, now I
Mm-hmm.
think it may be causing more pain.
So the pain now.
Hmm.
Let's kind of do an analysis or check in about what type of pain you're experiencing in the here and now.
Hmm. It's been, you know, I think after the breakup initially, it was, you know, really tough. I don't think I recognized how close I'd become to her, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and how close we were until, you know, we really decided to come apart. And then it was like, you know, break up all over again. You know, it's like just being thrown out into the desert and the, you know, the sun and, you know, the scorpions and the, you know, no water anywhere. And, you know, not being able to sleep, or sleeping too much. I felt like, in a lot of ways, like sleep was my avenue to, it was like my break. I didn't have to deal with things, emotionally or cognitively, if I just kind of, you know, went to sleep.
It's the numbing you talked about.
Yeah, yeah, I would totally like crash out and just like, and for a while, you know, I would, my days and nights really kind of got, you know, mixed up,
Mm-hmm.
and you know, I'd get up, and you know, I hit Nyquil and I'd go right back, you know, to sleep, and so
Mm-hmm.
it was just like this cycle.
Right. So you were using chemical to
Hmm.
help you sleep even more so that
Hmm.
you didn't have to deal with it. It had become a coping strategy.
Right.
And now, are you still using the NyQuil to help you sleep?
Um, no, because you know, after a few weeks of that, you know, it was just. I mean, I I felt like a zombie, like I was a little bit comatose, and
Mm-hmm.
the bills weren't getting paid. I wasn't getting work done. It was starting to be like, you know, a real issue.
When would you say that changed? When did you make that kind of shift out of that coping strategy?
Probably within maybe within this last week.
Okay, so
You know,
pretty recent.
yeah. Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's you know, I think a combination of things happened. I started getting like family members and friends like showing up.
Not
Like
just
they're
calling.
not
Now they're
calling,
showing up.
they're showing up, and I had a few like late notices, and that's like unlike me as far as bills go. I'm usually really on top of that. And there were things I was letting go with work, and of course that's unlike me as well. So
Hmm. So it sounds like your support system really made itself known and
mhm,
said, "We're worried."
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. It and I think a combination of those things kind of were like, hey, you gotta start digging out of this hole,
Hmm.
which is why I called to make the appointment because I was thinking don't think I'm digging out of this hole really well myself.
Hmm. So when you think about digging out of the hole now, you've talked about, okay, I'm not using the Nyquil anymore. It, how's the sleep going?
It was tough initially, when you come off of I think of any when I come off of a sleep aid, it's usually kind of hard. And I have some really jacked up dreams for a few
Hmm.
days, and so it's like coming out of that and just trying to sleep on on your own again. There's a lot of sleepless kind of nights.
How much sleep are you averaging now?
Well, that's funny because I went from like sleeping day and night with only probably 2 or 3 hours up within a 24-hour
Hmm.
time span to now like I'm doing good to get 4 or 5 hours in a night because now it's like I can't shut my brain off.
Hmm.
And so
Hmm.
like I've got this whole like just a series of thoughts one after the other and whatnot. So
Right. And so sleeping 4 to 5 hours,
mhm,
really having racing thoughts and not really being able to kind of shut yourself off.
mhm.
What else is going on that may be inhibiting your typical daily lifestyle?
Well, I think isolating is probably one of the bigger things. People physically had to come by.
Hmm.
I wasn't reaching out. Haven't been. Even since then, I avoid people avoid phone calls.
Hmm.
Because people always ask the same questions. How are you doing? What's going on? And I feel like I have to revisit things over and over again,
Hmm.
and that just stirs up the pain again.
Right.
And
Hmm.
I'm trying to kind of move away from that.
Right. So you're avoiding contact with
Mm,
people because you don't want to talk about what's happening,
yeah.
what you're feeling.
Hmm. Yeah. So, whatever I can do to kind of avoid the pain, there's sometimes where I feel like, I think when I was really kind of hitting the nightclub, if I could just go to sleep and just like not wake back up, man, that would be
Hmm.
cool.
So you thought about the fact that it might be easier to die.
Hmm. Yeah, it was like, just non-existence. It was just, there was something about that because when I'm asleep, I'm not having to deal with things.
Hmm. And in that, I feel like, or hear, a sense of hopelessness.
Yeah, there was, the hopelessness I think comes in from the pattern. Like, am I
Hmm.
ever going to be able to get out of this pattern? Am I ever going to be able to get over this person? Can I move on? It's like finding yourself in a deep pit and you're looking upwards and you're thinking, there's no ladder here. How do
Hmm.
I get out of this?
Right. And at any point in time, did you feel the need to take matters into your own hand and kill yourself or be done with it?
Um, I never went that far. I
Hmm.
thought a lot about not being here or not existing, but not to the point where I'd want to like, off myself or anything.
So you never had a plan for
Hmm.
killing yourself or harming yourself?
No, mm-mm. No. I was real. If I could have an induced coma,
Right.
actually, I thought that would have been better.
A perma state of numbness.
Yeah, and I could just wake up after all this is over.
Right.
That would be,
And you wouldn't have to deal with the pain, feel the pain.
mm, that would be ideal.
Hmm.
And
And that aligns with what you're sharing, sleeping, not connecting, not wanting to
mm,
talk about, the experience.
yeah.
Hmm. How about eating, Andy? How are you doing with eating?
It's I go through spurts where like I'm not eating anything,
Hmm.
and then it'll be like late night and the thoughts will come and stuff, and I just want to like tie on like a bag of anything that's bad for me
Hmm.
and just kind of eat it, like so it ebbs and flows as far as that goes.
You said the thoughts come.
Yeah, I don't know what it is at night, but nights are when I just get these rapid thoughts of everything that's not going right or well.
Mm.
And so I totally have used food for comfort, and stuff. And night times are like really like the best time for donuts
Mm.
or anything like that's not so great for you.
Okay. Yeah.
Carrots just don't seem to
They
soothe.
don't cut it.
They
Mm-mm.
don't seem to soothe at all.
Right.
You
So
know.
it's really trying to fill that hole
Hmm.
with whatever you can.
Yeah,
Hmm.
pretty much.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that work, you got behind in work.
Hmm.
Tell me a little bit more about your work situation.
It's usually ideal because I can set my own schedule and pace and whatnot, which is wonderful. The downside of that is when you lack that intrinsic kind of motivation, when that's pretty much shot, there's no one external to hold you accountable unless you're really screwing up,
Mm.
and like you're not showing up, your work's not getting submitted. People are, they raise eyebrows over a period of time. You can do that for a little while, but not long.
Right. And so you'd reached to a point where people were taking notice that you weren't engaged and
Yeah,
turning things in.
absolutely. So at that point, it's like, probably need to do some work,
Hmm.
you know.
And so, what's the status of your work right now?
I feel about as I feel caught up, and I'm definitely where I need to be, with work. Am I loving it? No.
Mm.
It's like I feel like I'm going through the motions.
So, one of the things that is really standing out to me is this numbness,
Hmm.
this need to just disengage from your emotions.
Hmm.
Are there other ways that you avoid emotions?
I try to zone out. Like I watch movies, like brainless television
Mm-hmm.
and movies. Like I instituted like the Sunday night movie thing, because Mondays had the worst feel to them. Like that new work week coming on, new endeavors, and I'm not feeling it. And so I would just have this dread starting like Sunday afternoon into Sunday night. So I'd started going to movies and stuff and just kind of, you know, something that I could do to kind of check out for a few hours.
I'm curious, was there any connection to Mondays in either one of the previous relationships that you've had?
Well, I think Sunday was a day that I would normally talk to them. That was a time that she and I would talk.
Mm-hmm.
Sundays was like a connective day. I think.
So, missing that engagement, it
Hmm.
was hard to get into the week and really kind of get started.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's just like these series of thoughts that are like fairly negative, and it's just like going into that. And just wanting to avoid it.
Mm-hmm. Share with me some of those thoughts that might come up for you typically.
Like it's this feeling of kind of a dread that's attached with a thought like this again. You know, like I want to pick up the phone and call, and you pick up the phone and you're like, I shouldn't call. You know,
Mm-hmm.
and so then it sets off another series of thoughts like this is why you can't call.
Mm-hmm.
Things are not good. You're broken up. Things didn't work out again. And then it just spirals.
You know, Indy, I wonder if your the work situation you're in, the lifestyle that you've chosen for yourself, I wonder if that's not a protective factor too. It kind of allows you to stay protected
Hmm. Hmm.
from having to interact with people on a regular basis in person.
Yeah, I wouldn't doubt it, and that's something that's highly feasible. It does kind of keep me isolated somewhat from people, and it is really it's a struggle to to connect with people locally because I think I've done such a good job with isolating.
Mm, okay. All right. So, one of the things that we typically do at this point in the counseling session is really take some time to reflect on what we've talked about.
Hmm.
So as you think back on what you've shared with me today,
Hmm.
what kind of stands out for you?
I think um, some of the things that I'm doing to maybe self sabotage,
Mm,
and some of the things that I'm avoiding. The reason, the reasons why maybe avoiding a little bit.
a little bit.
Hmm. Yeah,
Hmm.
a lot some days.
A lot some days, right? I
Yeah.
mean, the what you described to me sounds like a lot of
Hmm.
avoiding, a lot of
Hmm.
numbing,
Hmm.
a lot of isolating.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So, um, really becoming conscientious of how you're describing it to yourself,
Hmm.
because you're describing a lot, but you continue to use language that makes it a little,
Kind of minimizing. Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
minimizing.
Kind of minimizing.
Yeah,
Sort of.
sort of. Hmm. So, what we'll do now is really reflect on what we've talked about today.
Hmm.
And then the next step would be to get back together after you've had some time to think about what we've talked about today. I mean, you've been
Hmm.
aware of kind of what's going on and have a greater awareness now, I think, of how it might be impacting you on a day to day basis.
Hmm.
So the next step would be to talk about what do you want to do about it?
Okay. All right.
Okay, so
Sure.
maybe we can get back together either in a few days or early next week and talk about kind of what you've thought about since this session
Hmm.
and really think about what you want to accomplish. Because one of the things that's going to be really important is not to try to change everything at once.
Well, that sounds more feasible. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the
Hmm.
slow, steady approach usually results in a change in pattern. Whereas, as you know, with your eating, like when you
Hmm.
don't eat, don't eat, don't eat, then you binge, and then you don't feel good,
Yeah.
and then you don't eat again,
Right.
it's not consistent and it doesn't feel good long term.
Absolutely.
Okay, so maybe we can get together and talk a little bit more about some goals at that point.
I'm open.
Andy, now what we're going to do is just talk a little bit about the session for the students.
Okay.
All right, really,
Sure.
for you as the client,
Hmm.
what, if any, skills did you notice that might have been helpful?
The challenging, it was subtle and it was sweet. It was not, it didn't make me, it didn't push me back, but it challenged some of the things that I was doing. The minimizing specifically, bringing that out, on one hand, you're not like kind of using this language. On the other hand, what you're sharing doesn't match
Right.
up in a very kind of, in a kind way. It made me really kind of it challenged my own thoughts about what I'm saying and versus what I'm doing.
Okay. All right. And one of the things I noticed is that when you talked about the previous relationship, your body got very tense.
Hmm.
Your breathing changed.
Hmm.
So that was one of the reasons I introduced the breathing exercise
Hmm.
because it felt like, to me, my experience as a counselor was that this was like exactly like a protective coating that you were wearing
Hmm.
that was just almost like smothering you.
Right. And I really didn't want to go there.
Mm-hmm.
There's part of me that struggle with that because I think I've been setting up methods to avoid that feeling and sensation,
Mm-hmm.
and the breathing in and around it just heightened it more.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think for a few moments I thought about maybe what I was going to do like after the session, or if there was any more food,
Right.
anywhere, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I was able to connect with it at
Mm-hmm.
some point, and I did sense a movement and everything, which was kind of cool.
Right.
But then there's, when I connected with it, there was a part of me that wanted to move away from it.
Right. Hmm. So that's really important to know about clients. They may describe the experience as one thing in session, but actually be having a different experience with whatever's going on
Hmm.
within themselves.
Sure.
Because not often are they willing to take the actual internal
Hmm.
experience, at least right away,
Hmm.
right, and put it out there
Right.
because they haven't had time to turn it over for themselves.
Hmm.
So, in that type of exercise, I probably would circle back to the client at the beginning of the next session
Hmm.
and reference that and ask
Hmm.
them about that and ask
Hmm.
them if they've thought about it
Hmm.
anymore because then they may be in a better place to talk about the real experience of it.
Yeah. I think one of the things that maybe I didn't talk about before, the challenges were really good from a counseling standpoint, but what really kind of stood out is your ability to connect, using a lot of the micro skills and what have you. And the active listening skills and the paraphrasing, these kinds of things, staying engaged, not an ounce of judgment,
Mm-hmm.
anywhere. Those things made it very comfortable to kind of explore things, even if it is a pseudo, kind of scenario, what have you. It still was very comfortable to kind of open up and talk about, whatever came up,
Mm-hmm.
pretty much.
And at any point, did you feel like we were doing an intake or doing a
Mm-hmm.
biopsychosocial assessment?
Mm-hmm. No, it was not like a checklist.
Mm-hmm.
What you imagine is like, you've got these long, if you've ever worked in like the industry and you've got these long checklist of, all of these identifiers and whatnot, who the person is, their age, their, all these different kind of characteristics. There was never that feel. I didn't feel like there was anything in between us that got in the way of our relationship.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and when I think about the biopsychosocial, um, I'm not really thinking of anything that I think we didn't cover.
Hmm.
It's like informally, I could do a mental status. I could see that you were, cognizant,
Hmm.
you were articulate, you were able to engage in present day thinking,
Hmm.
right? I didn't necessarily need to do a formal
Hmm.
MSE to assess that. I could tell that by my interaction with
Sure.
you. You were able to, clarify language, explain
Hmm.
language, things like that. So I felt like, okay, I could check off. At
Hmm.
one point, we even did a suicide assessment. Was that awkward or uncomfortable?
Not at all. I noticed your language. Like you said, kill yourself.
Mm-hmm.
It was not you didn't use like other like softer language. You just really kind of put it out there,
Mm-hmm.
and so it really it kind of cut to the chase. And I was like, no, I didn't want to kill myself. So
Mm-hmm.
whereas I think if you would have used softer language, it may have. It may have kind of smoothed over, or we could have talked around something that was actually really important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And as far as your use of the NyQuil, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's, an abuse of a medication. How
Mm-hmm.
did you feel about how that was handled?
Mm-hmm. I think that was one of the points where, as a client, what you'd be looking for is judgment. Like, yeah, I'm using NyQuil, and you're waiting for someone to say, "You're using NyQuil," you
Do you
know,
know that's bad for you?
yeah, that's awful. You're a terrible person, and there was never that.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't get that kind of judgment piece.
Okay, great. All right. Can you think of anything else that would be beneficial
Mm-hmm.
for the students to consider?
From the opening to the ending, the way that you really kind of left things open, a very open door in the beginning. There was no leading there. To the very end, to the summarization and whatnot. Just kind of like, here's what's going on. Actually, bringing me into the summarization
Mm-hmm.
process, I thought was pretty cool. And of course, leaving the door open for the next session.
Right. And one of the things that I try to do too is I try to prepare the client for what's going to happen next.
Hmm.
Especially if it's somebody's first time in counseling, they
Hmm.
haven't had this experience. I mean, you had talked about how it was a pretty big deal that you had reached out
Hmm.
for help in this. So I
Hmm.
want to encourage, but I also don't want to say, I'm going to set some goals for you by the next session.
Right.
I wanted to give you some ownership of that process because it's your process and
Sure.
wanted to get you to start thinking about what is it that you want to work on
Hmm.
next. Mm-hmm.
Yep. Absolutely.